died in the conflict, but the hidden costs to the delicate Russian economy, to the people's slender faith in their government, were far greater. Only a few years later, the entire system would come tumbling down. Interpretation. The great German general Erwin Rommel once made a distinction between a gamble and a risk. Both cases involved an action with only a chance of success, a chance that is heightened by acting with boldness. The difference is that with a risk, if you lose, you can recover. Your reputation will suffer no long-term damage, your resources will not be depleted, and you can return to your original position with acceptable losses. With a gamble, on the other hand, defeat can lead to a slew of problems that are likely to spiral out of control. With a gamble, there tend to be too many variables to complicate the picture down the road if things go wrong. The problem goes further. If you encounter difficulties in a gamble, it becomes harder to pull out. You realize that the stakes are too high. You cannot afford to lose. So you try harder to rescue the situation, often making it worse and sinking deeper into a hole that you cannot get out of. People are drawn into gambles by their emotions. They see only the glittering prospects if they win, and ignore the ominous consequences if they lose. Taking risks is essential. Gambling is foolhardy. It can be years before you recover from a gamble, if you recover at all. The invasion of Afghanistan was a classic gamble. The Soviets were drawn in by the irresistible lure of possessing a client state in the region. Dazzled by that prospect, they ignored the reality. The Mujahideen and outside powers had too much at stake to ever allow the Soviets to leave behind a secure Afghanistan. There were too many variables beyond their control. The actions of the United States and Pakistan, the mountainous border areas impossible to seal off, and more. An occupying army in Afghanistan involved a double bind. The larger the military presence, the more it would be hated, and the more it was hated, the larger it would have to be to protect itself, and so on indefinitely. Yet the Soviets took their gamble and made their mess. Now, too late, they realized that the stakes had been raised. To pull out, to lose, would be a devastating blow to their prestige. It would mean the expansion of American interests and a cancerous insurgency on their border. Since they should never have invaded in the first place, they had no rational exit strategy. The best they could do would be to cut their losses and run. But that is nearly impossible with a gamble, for gambling is governed by emotions, and once the emotions are engaged, it is difficult to retreat. The worst way to end anything, a war, a conflict, a relationship, is slowly and painfully. The costs of such an ending run deep. Loss of self-confidence, unconscious avoidance of conflict the next time around, the bitterness and animosity left breeding. It is all an absurd waste of time. Before entering any action, you must calculate in precise terms your exit strategy. How exactly will the engagement end, and where will it leave you? If the answers to those questions seem vague and full of speculation, if success seems all too alluring and failure somewhat dangerous, you are more than likely taking a gamble. Your emotions are leading you into a situation that could end up a quagmire. Before that happens, catch yourself. And if you do find you have made this mistake, you have only two rational solutions. Either end the conflict as quickly as you can, with a strong, violent blow aimed to win, accepting the costs and knowing they are better than a slow and painful death, or cut your losses and quit without delay. Never let pride or concern for your reputation pull you farther into the morass. Both will suffer far greater blows by your persistence. Short-term defeat is better than long-term disaster. Wisdom is knowing when to end. By Confucius. To go too far is as bad as to fall short. Ending as beginning. As a young man, Lyndon B. Johnson had just one dream: to climb the ladder of politics and become president. When Johnson was in his mid-20s, the goal was starting to seem unreachable. A job as the secretary of a Texas congressman had allowed him to meet and make an impression on President Franklin D. Roosevelt, who had named him the Texas Director of the National Youth Administration, a post promising excellent political connections. But Texas voters were extremely loyal, often returning congressmen to their seats for decades or until they died. Johnson urgently wanted a seat in Congress. If he did not get one soon enough, he would be too old to climb the ladder, and he burned with ambition. On February 22, 1937, out of the blue, the chance of a lifetime opened up. The Texas Congressman James Buchanan suddenly died. The seat he left empty, that of Texas's 10th district, was a rare opportunity, and the state's eligible political heavyweights immediately threw their hats in the ring. The many contenders included Sam Stone, a popular county judge, Shelton Polk, an ambitious young Austin attorney, and C.N. Avery, Buchanan's former campaign manager, the favorite to win. Avery had the support of Tom Miller, mayor of Austin, the 10th district's only large city. With Miller's backing, he could count on almost enough votes to win the election. Johnson was faced with a terrible predicament. If he entered the race, the odds would be absurdly against him. He was young, only 28, and in the district he was unknown and poorly connected. A bad loss would damage his reputation and set him far back on the road to his long-term goal. If he chose not to run, on the other hand, he might wait 10 years for another chance. With all this in mind, he threw caution to the winds and entered the race. Johnson's first step was to call to his side the dozens of young men and women whom he had helped or hired over the years. His campaign strategy was simple. He would separate himself from the other contenders by presenting himself as Roosevelt's staunchest supporter. A vote for Johnson was a vote for the president, the popular architect of the New Deal. And since Johnson could not compete in Austin, he decided to aim his army of volunteers at the countryside, the sparsely populated hill country. This was the district's poorest area, a place where candidates rarely ventured. Johnson wanted to meet every last farmer and sharecropper, shake every possible hand, win the votes of people who had never voted before. It was the strategy of a desperate man who recognized that this was his best and only chance for victory. One of Johnson's most loyal followers was Carroll Keach, who would serve as his chauffeur. Together, the two men drove every square mile of the hill country, tracing every dirt path and cow trail. Spotting some out-of-the-way farmhouse, Johnson would get out of the car, walk to the door, introduce himself to the startled inhabitants, listen patiently to their problems, then leave with a hearty handshake and a gentle plea for their vote. Convening meetings in dusty towns consisting mainly of a church and a gas station, he would deliver his speech, then mingle with the audience and spend at least a few minutes with everyone present. He had an incredible memory for faces and names. If he happened to meet the same person twice, he could recall everything he or she had said the first time around, and he often impressed strangers by knowing someone who knew them. He listened intensely, and was always careful to leave people with the feeling that they would see him again, and that if he won, they would finally have someone looking out for their interests in Washington. In bars, grocery stores, and gas stations all through the hill country, he would talk with the locals as if he had nothing else to do. On leaving, he would make sure to buy something: candy, groceries, gasoline, a gesture they greatly appreciated. He had the gift of creating a connection. As the race ran on, Johnson went days without sleep.